How
Midday
dare
light
you
poured
stand
through
there
the glass
silently after
walls.
the mess you made?
A man in a
You
gray
think this is a
uniform stood in
joke?
the corner,
You are finished
silently
here if you
wiping
can't handle
down
this simple
tables.
task.
The young CEO leaned forward, her voice ice cold. Careful, janitor. That phone costs more than your entire month's salary. Laughter erupted around the table. He didn't react. He simply placed the phone flat on the glass surface, then pressed down hard. Crack. The sound shattered every laugh in the room. A small metal object fell from the case, rolling to a stop beside her hand. Light reflected off her face. She turned pale white. The entire room held its breath. He stood silent, just wiping away the remaining glass dust with his cloth. Caleb Vance, single dad, former rescue service, now a temporary janitor at Grant & Company. Every morning before work, he drank coffee at a small shop with his 7-year-old daughter, Leah. She loved to draw. Leah wrote on a piece of paper, "Respect is a quiet language," the phrase her father always said. He told her to stick it on the corner of her desk, to remember that respect doesn't need a loud voice. When Caleb stepped into the company building, nobody paid attention. Just a few employees glancing with contempt. One whispered, "Used to be military, now mopping floors. How sad." He heard it, but he didn't react. In the conference room, CEO Evelyn Grant was reviewing plans for Valor Square, a memorial park dedicated to her father, Captain Owen Grant. Caleb was assigned to clean the room before the meeting. As he bent down, Evelyn walked in with her PR team. The scent of perfume and the sound of high heels echoed against the reflective floor. She frowned. "Hurry up. Don't leave any marks," he answered simply. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him more closely. "Where did you serve?" "A place where people didn't ask about titles." He lowered his head, kept wiping. A metallic glint reflected from a tag beneath his shirt. She caught a glimpse, but didn't pay attention. On his way home, Leah called, "Dad, I stuck your quote on the classroom wall. The teacher loved it." Caleb smiled. "One day you'll understand why it matters." He hung up, looked at the building reflecting the afternoon sun. The image of father and daughter merged into the glass window, like two parallel worlds. The next morning came quietly. Caleb arrived early. The lobby was empty. He pushed his cart through the halls, the wheels squeaking softly on polished marble. In the break room, 2 junior executives stood by the coffee machine. "Did you hear? The old man's daughter is running this place now." "Yeah, all talk about honor and legacy. Meanwhile, she's cutting benefits." And they noticed Caleb, lowered their voices, walked away. He wiped down the counter, found a photo someone had dropped. It showed a military ceremony. Captain Owen Grant shaking hands with soldiers. Caleb stared at it for a long moment, then placed it on the lost and found shelf. That afternoon, Evelyn held a staff meeting in the glass-walled boardroom. Caleb was cleaning the adjacent hallway. Through the transparent walls, he could see her gesturing confidently, pointing at architectural renderings of Valor Square. Her voice carried through the glass. "My father believed honor should be visible, celebrated. This park will ensure his legacy is never forgotten." Applause filled the room. Caleb paused. His hand rested on the cleaning cart. He looked down at the metal tag hanging from his neck, hidden beneath his shirt, worn and scratched. He whispered to himself, "Honor doesn't need a stage, Captain." Evening came. Leah was doing homework at the kitchen table when he got home. She looked up. "Dad, what does quiet language mean?" He sat beside her. "It means some things don't need to be said out loud to be true." She thought about it, then nodded. "Like when you help people but don't tell anyone." He touched her head gently. "Exactly like that." Outside the window, the city lights began to flicker on, one by one. In the distance, the Grant & Company tower stood tall, its windows glowing like a beacon. But Caleb wasn't looking at the lights. He was looking at his daughter, writing those words again on a fresh piece of paper, carefully, slowly. Respect is a quiet language. Launch day for Valor Square arrived. Evelyn appeared before the media. Cameras flashed, microphones clustered around her like hungry birds. She spoke with practiced confidence. "Honor must be visible. My father is proof of that." Applause rippled through the crowd. Caleb stood in the back. hidden behind a pillar, wiping down tables after the press conference. An employee rushed in with coffee, tripped on a cable. The cup flew from her hands. Coffee splashed across the conference table. Droplets hit Evelyn's phone. The room froze. Evelyn stared at the stain on her phone case. Her jaw tightened. "Do you know how much this costs?" Nervous laughter broke out from the management team. Caleb stepped forward quietly. "I'll clean it, ma'am." She turned to him, her voice sharp, cold. "If you touch it again, you're fired." The entire room went silent. Every eye turned to him. He looked at the phone, then at her. His expression didn't change. He picked it up, placed it flat on the glass table, and pressed down. Crack. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. A piece of the case broke away. Something small fell out, rolled across the table. Metal glinted under the lights. Evelyn leaned forward. Her breath caught. Engraved words, worn but clear. Captain Owen Grant. Her lips trembled. Her hand covered her mouth. Caleb's voice was steady, quiet. "Returning it to the right person," she whispered. "Where did you get this?" "From where it belongs." He bent down, picked up the glass shards, and walked away. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Questions flew. Someone grabbed their phone to record. Evelyn stood frozen, staring at the metal tag in her palm, her father's name, warm against her skin. By evening, the news spread like wildfire. Janitor destroys CEO's phone, suspended immediately. The headline appeared on internal company channels. Screenshots circulated. Speculation ran wild. Caleb sat in the parking garage, his work uniform still on. He called home. "Leah, sweetheart, Dad's coming home late. Did you remember to read our phrase?" Her small voice came through the speaker, clear and proud. "Respect is a quiet language." He smiled. "That's right. Keep it safe." He hung up, looked at his reflection in the car window. The metal tag around his neck swayed slightly. "Captain," he whispered, "I'm still doing my part." That night, everything changed. An emergency alarm blared through the building at 2 a.m. The fire safety system malfunctioned. Sprinklers failed. Backup generators didn't kick in. The entire company faced potential shutdown. Evelyn called an emergency meeting at dawn. "The maintenance team is responsible for this," she snapped. The head of maintenance shook his head. "Our systems were sabotaged. We need an expert, someone who knows military-grade equipment." Evelyn's assistant spoke up. "The janitor, Caleb Vance. His file says he was a rescue specialist. Bomb disposal. Emergency systems." Evelyn hesitated. "He was suspended. He's still on the premises. Never left." She found him in the basement, surrounded by exposed wiring. Toolbox open. Flashlight in his mouth. He didn't look up when she approached. "Mr. Vance." "Ma'am, why are you still here?" He connected 2 wires. Sparks flew briefly. "Because the job isn't finished." She watched him work. His hands steady, confident, every movement precise. "The tag," she said softly. "My father's tag. How did you—" He cut her off. Not rudely, just matter of fact. "Karbala, 10 years ago. I was pinned under debris after an IED explosion. Your father pulled me out. Gave me this." He tapped his chest. "Told me if I survived, give it to his daughter. And teach her something." Evelyn's voice cracked. "Teach me what?" "That honor doesn't need applause." Silence filled the basement. Only the hum of machinery, the drip of water from old pipes. He finished reconnecting the system. Stood up, wiped his hands on his uniform. "Systems back online. You're good for the morning inspection." He picked up his toolbox, started to walk away. "Wait." Her voice stopped him. "What else did he say?" Caleb turned. His eyes met hers for the first time. Really met them. "He said his daughter was strong, but strength without respect is just noise." He paused. "And that you'd understand, eventually." A tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought honoring him meant showing everyone, building monuments, making speeches." "Monuments fade, ma'am. Words echo, but the way you treat people? He gestured around the basement. That's forever. Morning light began filtering through the narrow basement windows. Caleb gathered his things. The inspection team arrives at 8. You'll pass. How do you know? Because your father taught me how to fix things, not just machines. He looked at her meaningfully. People too. He left her standing there, alone, holding the metal tag. She looked down at it. Her father's name, scratched, dented, real. Above her, footsteps echoed. The building was waking up, staff arriving, preparing for the inspection. But down here in the quiet of the basement, something else was waking up. A memory, a lesson, a truth. Her father's voice, distant but clear. Respect is a quiet language. She closed her fist around the tag, and for the first time in years she understood. Morning arrived with sharp urgency. The emergency board meeting, 8 a.m. sharp. Auditors filled the conference room, clipboards, stern faces, zero tolerance for failure. Evelyn stood at the head of the table, tailored suit, composed exterior. But her hand kept touching the pocket where she'd placed the metal tag. The lead auditor spoke first. Miss Grant, your facility experienced a critical system failure. Lives were at risk. Who is responsible for the resolution? She opened her mouth to respond. The door opened. Caleb walked in, still in his dusty uniform, tool belt hanging from his waist. Every head turned. I am, he said simply. Murmurs rippled through the room. An auditor frowned. And you are? Caleb Vance, maintenance. A janitor? Another auditor scoffed. We're discussing life safety systems and… I know what you're discussing. Caleb's voice was calm, steady. I'm the one who fixed them. Evelyn stared at him, her mouth slightly open. He reached into his pocket, pulled out 2 items, placed them on the conference table. 2 metal tags, side by side. One was his, name, serial number, service record. The other was Captain Owen Grant's. The room went completely silent. Caleb looked directly at the auditors, then at Evelyn. 10 years ago, Karbala battlefield. I was trapped under a collapsed building after an IED detonation. Alone, injured, out of communication. His voice carried weight, not loud, but undeniable. A man found me, Captain Owen Grant. He didn't have to. His unit was already evacuating, but he came back. He touched the captain's tag. He dug for 40 minutes, alone, under enemy fire, pulled me out, carried me 300 meters to the extraction point. Evelyn's hand covered her mouth. Tears pooled in her eyes. Before the helicopter took me, he gave me this. Caleb lifted the tag. He said if I survived, I had to promise him something. What? Evelyn's voice barely audible. Find his daughter, give her this, and teach her what he never had time to. The auditors shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't standard procedure, but nobody interrupted. He told me his daughter was brilliant, driven, strong, but that strength without respect becomes arrogance, and arrogance makes you blind. Caleb reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. Leah's handwriting. He unfolded it carefully, placed it next to the tags. Respect is a quiet language. My daughter wrote this. She's 7. She doesn't know your father, never met him, but somehow she wrote the exact words he said to me that day. Evelyn stood abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly. She walked to the table, picked up the paper with trembling hands. My father, she whispered. He used to say this every night before bed. Her voice broke. I forgot he said that. Tears streamed down her face now. She didn't try to hide them. After he died, I thought honoring him meant building things, big things, visible things. I thought if the world could see his name, carved in stone, lit by spotlights. She laughed bitterly. I thought that was respect. She looked at Caleb, really looked at him. But you've been here for weeks, cleaning floors, invisible, and you carried his memory more powerfully than anything I've built. Caleb's expression softened. Ma'am, your father didn't ask me to build him a monument. What did he ask? He asked me to remind you that honor isn't about being seen. It's about being worthy when no one's watching. The lead auditor cleared his throat, breaking the moment. Miss Grant, we still need to address the system failure. She straightened, wiped her eyes, turned to face them. The system failure was resolved because of this man, a former combat rescue specialist. Someone I dismissed as just a janitor. Someone who worked through the night without pay, without recognition, to save this company. She picked up both metal tags, held them up. My father saved lives in silence. This man fixed our building in silence. And I've been shouting about honor while understanding nothing about it. One of the auditors spoke. Your maintenance systems are now compliant, but we need accountability. Evelyn nodded. Then hold me accountable. I'm the one who failed to see value where it actually existed. Caleb stepped back. The building is safe. That's all that matters. No! Evelyn's voice was firm now. It's not all that matters. She turned to her assistant. Cancel the Valor Square groundbreaking. Gas filled the room. Ma'am, that's... Cancel it. We're redesigning the entire project. She looked at Caleb. The park will not be a monument to my father's name. It will be a memorial to the people who serve quietly, the ones whose names don't make headlines. The rescue workers, the janitors, the people who fix what's broken when everyone else has gone home. The room erupted in whispers. An auditor stood. Miss Grant, with all due respect, that's not what your board approved. Then I'll get new approval, or I'll fund it myself. Her voice cut through the noise. My father didn't die so his name could be on a plaque. He died saving people who nobody remembers. She placed the tags down gently, reverently. This building stands because of Mr. Vance. My father lived because he believed people were worth saving, whether anyone noticed or not. I've spent 2 years planning a park that celebrates the wrong thing. Evelyn walked to Caleb, extended her hand. Thank you for keeping your promise and for teaching me what my father couldn't. He shook her hand. He already taught you, ma'am. You just forgot for a while. A long silence. Then one of the auditors began to clap. Slowly, another joined, then another. Not loud, not enthusiastic. Just respectful, genuine. Caleb picked up his tool belt. I should get back to work. Mr. Vance, Evelyn's voice stopped him at the door. You're not a janitor anymore. He turned slightly. You're director of facility operations. Effective immediately. He smiled faintly. That's a fancy title for the same work, ma'am. Then do the same work, but let me pay you properly for it. He nodded once and left. The door closed behind him. Evelyn looked down at the 3 items on the table. 2 tags, 1 piece of paper. A drop of water fell from somewhere above, landed on the glass. The reflection scattered light across the tags, making them shine, like 2 stars, side by side. One auditor spoke quietly. That was unexpected. Evelyn smiled through her tears. My father always said the best lessons are. She picked up the paper, Leah's careful handwriting. Respect is a quiet language. And today, she whispered, I finally learned to speak it. The news spread like wildfire through the company. Internal memo, sent at 10 a.m. CEO publicly thanks former combat veteran for reminding us what honor truly means. Employees gathered around computer screens, reading, rereading. Some felt ashamed, others inspired. In the maintenance office, Caleb's old locker remained untouched. Someone had taped a note to it. Thank you for your service, both then and now. He found it when he returned to collect his things. He stood there for a moment, just looking at the words, then carefully folded the note, put it in his pocket. Evelyn found him in the basement, the same place they'd talked before. She descended the stairs slowly. No clicking heels this time, just sneakers. Jeans, a simple white shirt. Mr. Vance. He looked up from the circuit panel he was inspecting. Ma'am, I thought I told you, you're not maintenance anymore. Old habits. He smiled slightly. And someone needs to check these connections. She stepped closer. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I wanted to say something, away from the cameras, The board members. All of it. He waited. I built my entire career on my father's legacy. I thought that's what he would have wanted. His name everywhere. His story told and retold. She paused. But I was building a monument to my grief. Not to him. Caleb closed the circuit panel, wiped his hands on a rag. Grief makes us do strange things, ma'am. You carried his tag for 10 years, traveled across the country to find me, took a janitor job just to get close enough to give it back. Her voice cracked. That's not strange. That's devotion. It's a promise kept, nothing more. It's everything more. She reached into her pocket, pulled out both tags, his and her father's. When he pulled you out, did he know that he probably wouldn't make it? Caleb's jaw tightened. Yes. What did he say in those last moments? The question hung in the air, heavy, inevitable. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the daughter, not the CEO. He said, tell her I was proud, not of what she'll accomplish, but of who she'll become. Then he said, tell her respect is a quiet language, and she already knows how to speak it. She just needs to remember. Evelyn's hands covered her face, shoulders shaking, silent sobs. Caleb stood there, uncertain, then awkwardly placed a hand on her shoulder. He believed in you, more than you know. She looked up, eyes red. I've spent 5 years screaming his name, and you've spent 10 years whispering his lesson. Maybe that's what he needed. Both. No. She shook her head. He needed me to understand, and I didn't, not until you broke that phone. A faint smile crossed Caleb's face. That was an expensive lesson. She laughed through tears, worth every penny. They stood in comfortable silence. The building hummed around them, alive, functional. The new park design, she said. I want your input. I'm not an architect. No, but you understand what my father valued, and that's more important than blueprints. He nodded slowly. What are you thinking? Small plaques, no names, just professions. A janitor served here, a teacher taught here, a soldier protected here. Spaces where people can sit, reflect, remember the quiet ones. He would have liked that. Will you help me? Not as director of operations, as someone who knew him. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, on one condition. Anything. My daughter, Leah. She wants to contribute something, a drawing, her words. Can she? Evelyn smiled, genuine, warm. I would be honored. They walked upstairs together. The basement doors closed behind them. In the lobby, employees stopped, stared, then nodded respectfully. Caleb felt uncomfortable with the attention, but he didn't hide anymore. That afternoon, the inspection team returned. Final walkthrough. They went through every floor, every system, every safety protocol. The lead inspector approached Evelyn. Everything is not just compliant, it's exceptional. Whoever handled this treated it like lives depended on it. They did, she said simply. And lives do. The inspector nodded. Approved, full certification. Your company is cleared. Applause erupted from the gathered staff, but Evelyn didn't join. She walked to where Caleb stood, in the back, near the exit. Thank you, she said quietly. Just doing the job. No, you did more. You saved this building. You saved me from becoming someone my father wouldn't recognize. He looked at her. He would recognize you. He'd be proud. How do you know? Because you listened, and listening is the first word in that quiet language. She smiled, extended her hand, not as CEO to employee, but as equals. He shook it. A photographer from the company newsletter approached. Can I get a picture for? No, they both said simultaneously. The photographer looked confused. Evelyn smiled. Some moments don't need cameras. She turned to Caleb. Tomorrow, bring Leah. Let's show her the park plans, get her ideas. She'd like that. Good. 10 a.m. And Mr. Vance? Yes, ma'am. Call me Evelyn. We're past formalities now. He smiled. Evelyn. She walked away, back to her office, back to her work. But something had changed. In her posture, in her expression. She moved differently now, less like someone carrying a burden, more like someone who finally understood what the wait was for. Caleb left through the side door, the same door he'd entered every day for weeks. But today was different. Today people noticed. Today they understood. And that quiet language, it was finally being heard. The next morning arrived with golden light. Sunlight poured through the glass walls of the building. Caleb wiped down tables in the lobby. Old routine, new meaning. Leah sat on a stone bench nearby, sketchbook open, drawing yesterday's scene. Evelyn walked through the entrance, no high heels, no power suit, just white sneakers and a comfortable blazer. She stopped when she saw them. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," he smiled. "Good morning, Evelyn." She paused, then smiled back. "That's better." She approached Leah, knelt down beside the bench. "What are you drawing?" Leah looked up, shy at first, then held up the sketchbook. 3 hands, one belonging to her father, one to Evelyn, one to someone unseen. In the center, 2 metal tags, glowing. "It's about people who help each other," Leah said softly, "even when nobody's watching." Evelyn's eyes glistened. "That's beautiful. My dad says respect is a quiet language." "Your dad is very wise." Evelyn touched the drawing gently. "Can I ask you something?" Leah nodded. "Would you draw this for the new park, so everyone who visits can see it?" Leah's eyes widened. "Really? Really? Because some lessons can't be written on plaques. They need to be felt." She looked at Caleb. "Your father taught me that." Caleb rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "What do you say, sweetheart?" "Yes, I want to help." Evelyn stood, looked at both of them. Father and daughter, simple, honest, real. "You know what I realized?" she said. "My father didn't save people for recognition. He saved them because it was right. And you didn't keep your promise for reward. You kept it because you loved him." Caleb nodded. He was worth loving. "So are you." The 3 of them stood there, in the morning light, in the quiet, no cameras, no speeches, no applause, just understanding. Evelyn glanced at her watch. "The architects are coming at 10. Want to stay for the presentation?" Leah looked up at her father. He smiled. "We'd be honored." As they walked toward the conference room together, Evelyn noticed the small piece of paper in Leah's hand. The same words, in careful crayon. "Respect is a quiet language." "Can I keep that?" Evelyn asked gently. Leah thought about it, then handed it over. "You can have it, but you have to promise to remember." "I promise." And in that moment, 3 generations connected. One who served, one who learned, one who would carry it forward. The building hummed around them, alive with purpose. And somewhere, in the space between words, Captain Owen Grant smiled. Because some lessons don't die. They whisper, they wait, and when the right person finally listens, they echo forever. Which moment gave you chills? When he crushed the phone, or when she finally said, "I finally speak it"? Drop your city name below. Let's map where respect still lives. Let's prove the quiet language is still spoken. Where are you watching from? Comment your city. Let's see how far this story travels.